On April 18, 1906, her world collapsed. But her response was even more shocking than the catastrophe itself. She ordered 30 of the most luxurious rooms in her home to be boarded up forever. Her 7-story tower had been turned to dust. She herself was trapped in a single room. But she didn't see this as an accident. She saw it as an angry verdict from the spirits. And you will understand how the most personal tragedy in American history became one of its most successful business ventures. I will tell you why it was more logical for her to bury millions than to rebuild a single wall. Because on that morning, she realized she had broken the one crucial rule in her deal with death. This house is one of America's most famous attractions, a place where reality gives way to legend. People come here for a cheap thrill, for a ghost story to tell their friends. Tourists wander its corridors, their smartphones dutifully capturing the absurdity, a staircase that leads directly into the ceiling, a door on the second floor that opens into thin air. A guide recites memorized lines about a curse, and the crowd laughs on cue. It's a show, a well-oiled machine for selling someone else's madness. But stop for a moment. Let the group go ahead. Listen not to the voices, but to the silence that hides within these walls. And look at her, the only known photograph of the elderly woman in her thick, black veil, Sarah Winchester. Her face is not the face of a mad woman. It is a mask of grief carved by decades of mourning, a gaze with no hint of coyness or a plea for sympathy, only steel and an endless exhaustion. This house is not an attraction. It is her answer to the world. To understand this building, you must forget the ghosts sold in the gift shop and remember the ghosts that cannot be bought off. You need to feel the weight of her money, every plank, every stained glass window ordered from Tiffany, every nail hammered into a wall at 3 a.m. It was all paid for by a fortune that smelled of gunpowder. We think this is a monument to insanity. But what if it's a mausoleum built on a foundation of guilt? What if every illogical room is an attempt at redemption? Every dead-end corridor, a physical manifestation of despair? This building is not just a pile of wood and glass. It makes a statement. It hides its true motives behind a facade of absurdity. It remembers the sound of hammers that never stopped for 38 years, day and night, without a single day off, without a single blueprint. This isn't a story about a woman who built a strange house. This is the story of how one of America's wealthiest widows made a deal with her own fate. She was given a sentence: to build forever, and she obeyed. Because her endless construction was not an architectural whim. It was a desperate, primal instinct for self-preservation. She wasn't building to live. She was building so that she would be allowed to live. In the 19th century, America was drunk on the idea of destiny, a sacred right to expand, to move west, to conquer the wilderness. We think of it as a story of brave pioneers and railroads cutting across the continent. But destiny had its own instrument. It was made of blued steel and walnut wood, and it was stamped with a single name: Winchester. Far from the prairies and canyons, in the industrial heart of Connecticut, the smokestacks of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company billowed. This was not the workshop of a lone genius. This was a ruthless factory, an assembly line producing not just rifles, but the very possibility of conquest. Thousands of workers, deafened by the roar of machinery, assembled the mechanism that changed everything: the Winchester, model 1873. The gun that won the West. That's not an advertising slogan. It's a statement of fact. It gave one man the firepower of an entire squad: a settler, a soldier, a cowboy, a bandit. anyone could now deliver justice or lawlessness at a speed previously unimaginable. It was an engine of history, fueled by gunpowder, and it was incredibly, fabulously profitable. Every shot that ended a life on the vast plains echoed as a quiet clink of coins in safes on the other side of the continent. Every buffalo killed for its hide, every skirmish with Native American tribes defending their land. It was all part of the business model. The company's stock skyrocketed, feeding on the violence that had become synonymous with progress. And at the center of this financial web lived Sarah Winchester. After her husband's death in 1881, she became the heir. Not just a wealthy widow, she inherited $20.5 million, nearly half the company's stock, and a daily income of $1,000, a sum capable of distorting reality. She became an unwilling shareholder in America's bloody conquest, the chief beneficiary of the most efficient killing tool of her era. The money flowed to her in an endless stream, soulless numbers on a report, bearing no relation to the crack of gunfire or the smell of blood. She could afford anything the material world could buy, but she overlooked one thing. A fortune born from death brings more than just dividends. It brings ghosts. She inherited an empire of steel and wood, but with it, she inherited all of its nameless victims. The financial ledger was perfect, but she was about to face a different kind of accounting, one kept not in books, but in souls. In Sarah Winchester's world, everything had a price. Stocks, patents, human labor. Her sharp, educated mind was used to thinking in terms of assets and liabilities, profits and losses. But there was something that did not obey the laws of the market. Grief. Absolute, corrosive grief that cannot be sold, invested, or written off. First, the silence in the cradle. Her only daughter, Annie, died before she was a month old. Then, 15 years later, the emptiness in the marriage bed. Her husband, William, her rock, was consumed by tuberculosis. 2 blows that left her world in ruins, and her vast fortune, her $20.5 million, became not a comfort, but a mockery. Money could buy everything except the one thing that mattered. It could not turn back time. Broken, she went where the Victorian era sent all those who had lost hope in science and religion, to the dimly lit parlor of a Boston medium. She didn't come for comfort. She came for an answer. Why? Why her family? And the answer came. It sounded less like words of sympathy and more like the sentence of a judge. The medium's voice, that of a man named Adam Coons, was calm and merciless. He didn't speak of God's will or random chance. He spoke of a different kind of ledger. He said her money was cursed, that her family was being haunted not by bad luck, but by a legion of souls of those who had fallen to the weapon that bore her name. Native Americans, soldiers, outlaws, victims of random shootouts. They were all here. They were not seeking revenge. They were seeking a home. And until they found one, they would take her loved ones, one by one. Then came the prescription for salvation. The only way to appease this restless regiment. She must go west, toward the sun, where the American dream sets. And there, she must begin to build, to erect a house for herself and for them. And the construction, this was the crucial condition, must never, ever stop. As long as the hammer sounds, you will live. The moment it falls silent, they will come for you. This was not architectural advice. It was a deal. Her life in exchange for perpetual construction. For a woman who had lost everything, even the most insane plans seemed like salvation. She left Boston. She crossed the continent. And she found her place in the quiet, sun-drenched valley of San Jose, California. There, she bought a modest 8-room farmhouse. None of her neighbors could have imagined that this innocent seedling would become the nucleus of an architectural monster. Her statement to the world was silence. She vanished from the society pages. But her statement to the spirits was the first strike of a hammer, a sound that would not cease for nearly 4 decades, a life sentence she had accepted and begun to serve. We imagine that great construction projects begin with great plans, with blueprints spread across an architect's table, with measured lines, load calculations, approved estimates. Ambition takes shape on paper long before the first stone is laid. But here, in the San Jose Valley, the most ambitious building project in California began every morning with a blank slate. There was not a single blueprint. This is the central paradox of the Winchester House. A building that would eventually grow to 160 rooms was built without an architect, without a master plan, without any idea of what it would be tomorrow. The only designer was Sarah herself. Her will was law. Her visions were the only guide. Every day at dawn, she would meet with her foreman, John Hanson. In her hands were not rolls of blueprints. There was a scrap of a napkin, an envelope, a piece of wrapping paper. On it, a hand-drawn sketch for the day ahead. We will add a room here. This wall must be torn down. Today we start a tower, right here. The orders were absolute and not open to discussion. Modern architects, analyzing this chaos, call it stream of consciousness architecture. This building is not the result of design. It is a diary, written in wood and glass. Each edition is a new entry, dictated by fear or hope. Each demolished wall is a crossed-out line. The house grew not up and out, but followed the curves of her thoughts, like a living organism. For the workers, it was a world turned upside down. They were used to logic, to right angles, to a known objective. Here, they were asked to build a staircase that might be boarded up a week later, to erect a luxurious room, only to be ordered the next day to dismantle it because the spirits didn't like it. It was work on the verge of absurdity. But Sarah Winchester knew the cardinal rule of capitalism. Money can buy not only loyalty, but a willingness to tolerate madness. She paid her carpenters $3 a day, double the market rate. For that kind of pay, they were willing to follow the strangest of orders. They became the hands of her obsession, the obedient executors of the daily revelations she allegedly received in her secret seance room. They were building a labyrinth whose logic only she knew. Or perhaps she didn't know it either. Perhaps she was simply obeying an inner voice that demanded movement, change, an endless process. Because in her deal with fate, the most important thing wasn't the result, but the sound of the hammers, the sound that proved to her and to the unseen world that she was still fulfilling the terms of her sentence. She wasn't building a house. She was building another day of life. In a world of chaos, the human mind desperately seeks order. When the logic of the external world collapses, we create our own internal logic. For Sarah Winchester, building a house without a plan, that order was mysticism. The architectural delirium of her labyrinth was governed not by the laws of geometry, but by the laws of numerology, and her sacred number was 13. In the Victorian era, superstition wasn't just for the uneducated. It was part of the culture, a way of speaking about the unseen. Spiritualism, communicating with spirits, numerology, all were taken seriously. And Sarah, a woman of her time, turned her home into a giant numerical talisman. She wasn't just building rooms. She was encoding space. The number 13, which most considered unlucky, for her, seems to have become a symbol of protection, a magical seal. It is repeated throughout the house with an obsessive, manic precision. This is not a coincidence. It is a system. Here is the 13th bathroom. It has 13 windows, and the skylight has 13 glass panels. The conservatory, where she grew her favorite flowers, has 13 cupolas. The chandeliers she ordered often had 13 candle holders. Coat hooks in many rooms are grouped in sets of 13. Some of the parquet floors are composed of 13 sections. Even her last will and testament, the document summarizing her entire earthly existence, was divided into 13 parts and signed by her 13 times. This was not a quirk. It was her way of communicating with the forces she believed controlled her destiny. In a world where spirits could be angered by an incorrectly built room, numbers were the only universal language. They were her alchemy, an attempt to impose a mystical order on material chaos. Imagine a carpenter receiving an order to install a window with 13 panes, or a floor layer told to create a pattern with 13 panels. For them, it is the absurd whim of a rich employer. For her, it is a vital ritual. Every nail, every beam, every window frame subjected to the magic of the number 13 became part of a spell, built in stone and wood. She was waging a war with an invisible world. And in this war, she had two weapons. The first was the endless stream of money, born from violence. And the second was a secret code of numbers with which she tried to appease the ghosts created by that violence. The house became her grimoire, her book of spells, where every detail held a hidden meaning, understood only by her. She was trying to control the supernatural with the most earthly of tools, arithmetic. We think this house is a mockery of common sense, an architectural joke told by a madwoman, and its main exhibit is a war on gravity. Here it is, the famous staircase. Wooden steps, elegant railings. It rises to the second floor and simply ends at the ceiling. A dead end. Nonsense. Next to it, a door that, if you open it, leads to a 3-story drop. These are not builders' mistakes. These are orders given by the mistress of the house and paid for from a bottomless purse. Every such architectural dead end is a check written for a handsome sum, and the silent obedience of workers who had long stopped asking questions. But what if this isn't a mistake, but a statement? What if this isn't delirium, but a weapon? In Sarah Winchester's logic, her house was a battlefield. She was building not for people, but against spirits. And spirits, she believed, follow human paths. The staircase to the ceiling is not a miscalculation. It is a trap, a path that vanishes into nothing. The door to nowhere is not an oversight. It is a false exit, a lure for those who might be looking for her in the dark corridors. The most striking example of this strategy is the so-called switchback staircase. 7 flights, 44 steps, all to ascend just 9 feet. Any carpenter would have built a straight 10-step staircase here, but she made them create this exhausting maze. The building didn't just misdirect, it demanded effort. It was exhausting. It was declaring to its invisible guests, "Even here, in your own house, you will move by my rules." She was fighting ghosts by forcing them to wander in 3 dimensions. But this was only one of her wars, and perhaps not the most important one. If you look closely, behind the facade of this spiritualist madness, there lies a cold, rational genius fighting a very different battle. She was at war not only with ghosts, she was at war with her own body. Sarah suffered from severe arthritis, which turned every step into torture. And the house became her exoskeleton, her life support system. The very same easy riser stairs, with steps only a few inches high that so amused tourists, were not a whim for her. but a necessity. She rebuilt the laws of architecture to accommodate her pain. And here, her mind worked not like a mystic's, but like an engineer's. She installed 3 Otis elevators in the house, an unheard-of luxury for a private home at the time. One of them was unique, a horizontal hydraulic elevator that moved her from one part of a wing to another without a single step. She forced hydraulics and steel to obey her will and compensate for the weakness of her joints. In this labyrinth designed to confuse spirits, there was central steam heating, an internal communication system of speaking tubes, gas, and then electric lighting, and hot and cold running water. This was not a medieval fortress with ghosts. It was a technological citadel disguised as chaos. It was her personal paradox, built in wood, a house that was simultaneously an irrational trap for the dead and an ultra-modern, comfortable sanctuary for an ailing woman. She had mastered space, defied gravity and common sense. She had built a house that could deceive the dead and comfort the living, a fortress where every screw was under her control. But she overlooked one thing. The greatest forces in the universe obey neither money nor blueprints, and soon, the very earth beneath her feet would remind her of this with devastating fury. Within this wooden labyrinth, at the heart of the architectural madness, lies a treasure. It speaks not of fear, but of impeccable taste, not of chaos, but of harmony. The widow Winchester, builder of traps for spirits, was a connoisseur of beauty. She ordered the finest materials, mahogany from Java, teak from Burma, oak from American forests. The parquet floors in her home are not just planks, they are intricate mosaics, each with its own unique pattern. But the greatest evidence of her passion for beauty was the windows. 10,000 windows, and among them, masterpieces signed with the most prestigious name of the era. Tiffany. Louis Comfort. Tiffany was not just a craftsman. He was an alchemist who turned glass into light. His stained glass windows adorned the mansions of the Vanderbilts and Carnegies. They were symbols of status, wealth, and refinement. And Sarah Winchester became one of his most important clients. She didn't buy off-the-shelf pieces. She commissioned exclusive works, personally participating in their design. One such window is the embodiment of her obsession. It depicts a spiderweb, not sinister, but elegant, shimmering in the sun with hundreds of hues. In Victorian symbolism, a spiderweb meant good fortune and prosperity. Sarah made this symbol her own. She placed it in a window designed to catch the morning light. But there is another Tiffany window in the house. It is far more expensive and complex, a work of art that cost a fortune. Crystals imported from Austria are woven into the glass to refract light and scatter rainbows across the room. This window was meant to be the jewel of her collection, a symphony of light and color. And here, we encounter the crucial piece of evidence, the key to understanding this entire place. Sarah ordered this masterpiece to be installed not on an exterior wall, where it could be illuminated by the California sun. She had it mounted on an interior wall, between 2 rooms, a place where, under no circumstances, a single ray of sun could ever penetrate. Imagine the worker who, following orders, installs this work of art in perpetual darkness. He sees its beauty, he knows its price, and he understands the complete absurdity of the act. It's like buying a Stradivarius violin and locking it in a soundproof vault, like commissioning a portrait from Rembrandt and hanging it in a windowless room. It is an act devoid of all human logic, but it is in this very illogic that the answer lies. This window was not for us. It was never meant for human eyes. Its beauty was not intended to delight, comfort, or impress the living. It was a sacrifice, an offering, a gift made to the spirit world. Sarah Winchester was building them not just a house, not just a labyrinth. She was building them a palace filled with hidden treasures. She believed that the supernatural world sees what is hidden from us, that the spirits could appreciate the beauty of this window, even if it was plunged into darkness. It was an act of pure, desperate spiritualism embodied in glass. Every dollar spent on this masterpiece was a payment for peace. Every facet of crystal, doomed to eternal darkness, was a prayer for forgiveness. And in this gloom, where beauty is hidden, we finally understand for whom this house was truly built. Not for Sarah, and certainly not for tourists with their cameras. It was built for an invisible audience, for incorporeal spectators whose approval was more precious to its owner than sunlight. Beauty, sacrificed to darkness, was her most expensive and most desperate bargain. Imagine the San Jose Valley at the end of the 19th century, a quiet, almost pastoral world where life flows at a measured pace, governed by the changing seasons. Apricot orchards, golden hills, tranquility. And in the midst of this idyll, a wound, a relentless, round-the-clock industrial roar. The sound of hammers, the shriek of saws, the creak of hoists, a sound that never stops. Not by day, not by night, not on Sunday, not on Christmas. For 38 consecutive years, the Winchester House was not just an architectural anomaly, it was an acoustic anomaly, a constant source of noise that drove the entire neighborhood mad. For Sarah Winchester's neighbors, she was not a mysterious recluse, but a curse. Her endless construction was an act of aggression against silence, against the very right to peace. Local newspapers didn't write about her tragedy or her mystical quests. They wrote about the eccentric widow whose monster house was a public nuisance. Archived clippings are full of complaints. People couldn't sleep. Their livestock were spooked. Their peaceful lives were shattered by this ceaseless sonic storm. But all their protests broke against an invisible wall, a wall built of money. Sarah Winchester's estate was not just private property. It was a sovereign state with its own laws and a budget that exceeded that of a small city. Her fortune, earned from weapons, now became her shield. It bought her the right to ignore public opinion. She could afford to pay workers double for night shifts. She could afford any fines or legal costs. Her money was a wall far stronger than any in her house. It protected her from the outside world, from its rules, from its judgment. But there was another, deeper meaning to this endless noise. It was not just a side effect of construction. It was part of it, its purpose. Remember the medium's sentence? As long as the hammer sounds, you will live. For Sarah, this noise was not an inconvenience. It was a heartbeat, proof that she was upholding her end of the deal. Every hammer strike was a word in her ceaseless prayer. Every board nailed in the middle of the night was a talisman against death. She created not just a house, she created a sonic barrier between herself and reality. The outside world, with its demands, judgments, and logic, simply drowned in the din. Inside this acoustic cocoon, she could live by her own rules, in her own universe, where the only reality was her fears and her rituals. This noise was her loneliness made audible. It was her grief that could not be silent. It walled her off from her neighbors, but more importantly, it walled her off from silence. Because in silence, memories come. In silence, you hear the voices of the past. And Sarah Winchester, heiress to a gun empire, did everything she could to never be in silence. She paid a fortune to drown out not only the world around her, but the world within her. This house was the most expensive way in the world to not hear the whispers of your own ghosts. In the history of this house, there is only one main character, Sarah herself. But her visions, her fears, her architectural whims would have remained mere sketches on napkins if not for them, the nameless ones, those whose hands turned madness into reality, the carpenters, joiners, glaziers, and roofers. A crew of 20 to 50 men who, for decades, brought to life the strangest project in American history. Who were these men? History has not preserved their names. In official records, they are just lines in an expense ledger. But we can imagine them. They were immigrants from Europe seeking a better life. Irish, Italians, Germans, bringing with them centuries-old traditions of craftsmanship. They were local farmers, for whom work on the Winchester estate was a lifeline in lean years. They were young men, learning their trade right here, in this architectural looking-glass, where the laws of logic did not apply. They had one thing in common. They needed money, and Sarah Winchester paid generously. $3 a day, a sum that made one put up with a lot. Let's imagine the diary of one of these carpenters. Morning, summoned to the mistress again. She shows me a sketch on the back of a grocery bill. Here, she says, pointing to a perfectly finished mahogany wall we just completed last week. I want a window, a round one, with 13 panes. No explanation, no apology for the wasted labor, just an order. And you take your tools and start breaking what you so lovingly created just days ago. Because $3 is $3, and on that, your family will eat for another day. This job was a constant battle between professional pride and financial necessity. They were masters of their craft. They knew how to build things to last, and they were forced to erect staircases to ceilings, install chimney flues that ended before the roof, and mount doors that opened onto a solid wall. Every day was a test of their sanity. They would come home, and their wives would ask, "What did you build today, dear?" And what could they say? I built a dead end, a beautiful, well-crafted dead end, made of the finest oak. But there was another side to it. Despite the absurdity of the tasks, craftsmanship was valued here. Sarah demanded the best materials, the best finish, and she paid for it. Here, a carpenter could work with rare woods he couldn't have dreamed of elsewhere. A glazier could create the most intricate patterns. This construction site was both a curse and an academy, a place where you questioned your employer's sanity every day, but never the quality of the materials she provided. They were the keepers of her secrets. They saw her rare appearances on the site, a small figure in perpetual black mourning clothes. They heard the rumors of the nightly seances in the Blue Room. They knew which rooms she ordered boarded up, and which to be built with special care. They were the only witnesses to how grief and money, when mixed, could give birth to an architectural monster. And they remained silent. The double wages bought not only their labor, but also their silence. They became accomplices in her great project, co-conspirators in the construction of a labyrinth meant to cheat death. They were her army, her hands, her only connection to the material world. They left no memoirs, but they left traces of their skill in every perfectly fitted joint, in every elegantly carved baluster, and in every nail, driven into a wall for no logical reason at all. This was their silent chronicle, the story of how ordinary men, armed with hammers and saws, helped one of America's richest women wage her lonely, strange, and endless war. For 22 years, Sarah Winchester lived by the rules of her deal. Every day, her hammers pounded, warding off death. She built her world, subject to her will, her numbers, her fears. Her house grew like a tumor, consuming space and money. She erected a 7-story tower, the highest point in the valley, an observation post for her private universe, from which she could perhaps watch the world that had rejected her. In this universe, she was a god. She could command things to be built and command them to be destroyed. She controlled every board, every nail. She believed she had found a way to control fate. But on the morning of April 18th, 1906, she received an answer, not from the spirit world, but from the earth itself. At 5:12 a.m., California shuddered. The great earthquake. Tectonic plates shifted, releasing the energy of hundreds of atomic bombs. In San Francisco, just 50 miles to the north, the city was collapsing into fire and dust. And here, on the Winchester estate, nature delivered a precise, surgical strike. The house, built over decades, shook like a house of cards. Walls cracked, glass exploded from windows. The forest of 47 chimney stacks on the roof swayed like reeds in the wind. And then, a deafening crash. Sarah's pride, her 7-story observation tower, the symbol of her mastery over matter, gave way. It collapsed, folding in on itself. The top 3 floors were reduced to a pile of rubble. At that moment, Sarah was sleeping in one of her many bedrooms, the so-called Daisy Room, named for its daisy-themed stained glass. When the tremors began, the massive fireplace mantel collapsed, blocking the door. The room became a trap. The mistress of the universe was locked in a tiny space, surrounded by the crumbling chaos she herself had created. Her servants, panicked themselves, couldn't find her for hours. They ran through the shaking corridors, calling her name. But the only response was the roar of falling plaster and the crack of splintering beams. When they finally cleared the debris and opened the door, they saw their mistress. Small, frightened, but unbroken. For anyone else, this would have been a natural disaster, a terrible but random event. But not for her. In her world, there were no accidents. Everything was a sign. Everything was part of her dialogue with the beyond. And she interpreted this earthquake not as a geological phenomenon. She interpreted it as a message, as wrath. The spirits were displeased. 22 years of appeasement, millions of dollars spent, the endless sound of hammers, all for nothing. She had done something wrong, and they had delivered their verdict by destroying the most beautiful and tallest part of her home. She survived, but her belief that she was in control was shattered. The ground beneath her feet had proven stronger than her money, her will, and her fears. Nature had reminded her who was truly in charge. She could no longer trust anything, not the walls she built for protection, nor the earth on which they stood. After this blow, the construction would never be the same. Something had broken, not just in the structure of the house, but in the soul of its owner. And her response to this sign from above would be even more radical, even stranger, than anything she had done before. She was not preparing to rebuild. She was preparing to retreat. After a disaster comes the time to clear the rubble, to assess the damage, to plan the reconstruction. This is what common sense dictates. This is what business logic dictates. But Sarah Winchester no longer lived in the world of common sense. Her world was governed by omens, and the earthquake was the most fearsome of them all. She conducted her own damage assessment, not an engineering one, but a spiritual one. She wandered through the surviving but battered rooms of her estate, and a verdict formed in her mind. The spirits were angry, but not at the construction itself. They were angry at her vanity. She had gotten carried away. She had devoted too much money and attention to the front, public-facing part of the house, the part that was turned toward the world of men. The luxurious drawing rooms, the grand ballroom, the elegant 7-story tower. All of it was built not for them, but for her. It was pride, embodied in wood, and for that pride, she was being punished. The decision she made was shocking, even to the workers who were used to her eccentricities. She would not rebuild what was destroyed. She would bury it. She gave an order that sounded like an abdication. Board it up. Forever. 30 of the most beautiful and richly decorated front rooms of the house, including the grand ballroom that had cost $9,000, were to be sealed. This was not a temporary measure. It was a ritual act. Picture the scene. The same carpenters who just yesterday were laying intricate parquet floors and installing carved panels now return with different tools, with heavy hammers and long nails. They take rough pine boards, and one by one, they nail shut the magnificent mahogany doors. Every hammer blow is not the sound of construction, but the sound of a burial. They board up the windows, plunging rooms once filled with light and air into eternal darkness and dust. It was a sacrifice. She was giving the spirits the most valuable part of her home to atone for her guilt. From this moment on, her project changes direction, literally. The construction no longer reaches outward, toward the light, toward the outside world. It turns inward. It becomes even more chaotic, even more claustrophobic. New rooms are built inside old ones. Staircases lead from nowhere to nowhere. The corridors become even more tangled. The house begins to devour itself. Sarah Winchester had turned her back on the world of men forever. By boarding up her grand facade, she symbolically boarded up her connection to society. With its rules and expectations, she no longer even tried to create the appearance of normalcy. Her estate had definitively become a closed system, a labyrinth existing only for her and her invisible guests. She sank deeper and deeper into the heart of her creation, into the darkness of the sealed rooms. This was not just a retreat, it was a rebirth. From an eccentric widow building a strange mansion, she was transforming into the high priestess of her own cult, where architecture was prayer and the noise of hammers was a perpetual service. She had lost the battle with the forces of nature, but she had found a new way to continue her war. A war that would now be waged not from towering heights, but in the dark, winding corridors of her own soul. After the earthquake, the house stopped growing up. It began to sprawl like a living creature, seizing more land, consuming more wood, glass, and human labor. The construction reached its peak, its apex of madness. Viewed from above, the estate doesn't look like a house. It looks like a medieval city, built without a plan by a mad king for a single inhabitant. A forest of roofs, turrets, bay windows, balconies, a jumble of architectural forms, devoid of a center or symmetry. It's not a building, it's frozen chaos. Let's step away from the mysticism for a moment and speak the language of numbers, because the numbers here are more eloquent than any legend about ghosts. 160 rooms. Just think about that. That's more than in Buckingham Palace. 40 bedrooms. Why would one woman need 40 bedrooms? 13 bathrooms, 6 kitchens, 10,000 windows. An entire city could look out at the world through them. 2,000 doors. Most of them led nowhere. 47 fireplaces, and only a few of them worked properly. Their flues created a veritable stone forest on the roof. 40 staircases, with hundreds and hundreds of steps in total. And all of this cost her $5.5 million. In today's terms, that's over $170 million. A sum that could build a skyscraper. But she built a labyrinth. This wasn't just construction. It was an economy. An entire industry running on the fear of one woman. The money she received from the sale of the deadliest weapon of her era was immediately converted into carpenters' wages, lumber bills, and orders for Tiffany glass. It was an endless cycle. Death in the Wild West paid for the construction of a sanctuary from the spirits of that death in a quiet California valley. Every stone in this wall is a share of Winchester stock, bought on the edge of someone else's life. Every plank in this floor is a dividend from a patent on rapid-fire technology. But what do all these numbers really mean? They are just a way to measure an emptiness. This is the physical, material embodiment of her loneliness. A loneliness so vast, it required 160 rooms. A loneliness so deep, it had to be enclosed by walls of mahogany. A loneliness so deafening, it could only be drowned out by the round-the-clock sound of hammers. She wasn't building a house. She was building a stage set for her own isolation. In this giant city, she was the sole inhabitant, and thousands of invisible ghosts were her only subjects. This was her empire, an empire built from fear, paid for with blood, and inhabited by silence. The ultimate monument to how the richest person can also be the loneliest, and how the strongest walls we build are the ones that separate us not from the world, but from ourselves. The house was built, but how was it lived in? What was the daily routine of the queen of this strange empire? Outside, the ceaseless noise of construction. But inside, in Sarah's private quarters, a completely different atmosphere prevailed. An atmosphere of a carefully planned, almost monastic ritual. Her life was not a series of random events, but a daily performance, staged for an invisible audience, and the only spectator who knew the script was her. It all began at night. At precisely midnight, a bell would toll. This was her signal. Leaving whichever bedroom she had chosen, for she never slept in the same room 2 nights in a row, to confuse the spirits. She would make her way to the heart of her labyrinth, to the so-called blue room, or seance room. This was her sanctuary. It had only one entrance, but 3 different exits. Here, in solitude, legend says she conducted her spiritualist seances. She would spread plans and sketches on a table and consult with the spirits on what to build next. It was here that the most absurd ideas were born. Staircases to ceilings, doors to nowhere. For her, this was not fantasy. It was receiving instructions. At 2 in the morning, the bell would ring again, ending the seance. Then it was time for dinner. A lavish dining room set for 13 guests. The finest china, silver cutlery, crystal glasses. Everything was ready to receive honored guests. But the guests never arrived, at least not the visible ones. This dinner was for the spirits. Sarah herself, the hostess of this feast, would eat humbly in the kitchen, alone with her servants. It was another act of humility, another offering. Her entire life was steeped in symbols and prohibitions. There were almost no mirrors in the house. Legend claims she was afraid of seeing not herself in their reflection, but the ghosts that haunted her. She wore perpetual mourning, never removing her black veil even in private. This was not just a tribute to her husband and daughter. It was her uniform, her way of showing the spirit world that she remembered her guilt. But her life was not that of an ascetic. In this strange world of rituals, there was also a love for beauty. She would spend hours in her vast conservatory, tending to exotic flowers and plants. This small piece of living, growing nature was her only refuge from the world of the dead. She built a grand ballroom with a parquet floor of 6 different woods and silk-covered walls. But music never played there, and no couples ever danced. It was built and immediately abandoned, like a beautiful but empty shell. This was not life as we understand it. It was a meticulously crafted, carefully directed ritual of survival. Every step, every gesture, every eccentricity was part of her strategy: to appease, to placate, to outwit the forces she believed were hunting her. The house was not just her prison, it was her monastery, a stage on which she played her part every day in an endless drama of redemption. September 5th, 1922. The dawn over the San Jose Valley was no different from the thousands of other dawns this estate had seen. With the first rays of sun, as it had for 38 years, the familiar rhythm began. The sound of hammers, unhurried, monotonous, almost meditative. The sound that had become the soundtrack of this valley. For Sarah Winchester, now 82 years old, this sound was synonymous with life, proof that her deal was still in effect. But that morning, something changed. The familiar sound of hammers suddenly stopped. Silence fell. A deafening, unfamiliar, anxious silence. It spread across the estate like a shockwave. The workers on the scaffolding froze, looking at each other. What had happened? Why had the work stopped? The news swept through the corridors faster than a draft. Sarah Winchester was dead, quietly, in her sleep, of heart failure, not at the hand of a ghost, not as a result of a collapsed wall, but as ordinary people die. Her life sentence had been served. The deal was complete. The curse, if there ever was one, was lifted. The workers slowly descended from the scaffolding. They took off their aprons, gathered their tools, and went home. On one of the walls, a nail remained, hammered exactly halfway in. The last hammer strike, frozen in time. A symbol that the great, insane construction was over. Forever, a different kind of activity began. Lawyers and executors arrived. Everyone awaited the reading of the will. What would be the fate of this architectural monster? What would become of the fortune, estimated in the millions? And the will was read. It was detailed, meticulous, divided, as was fitting, into 13 parts. Huge sums were donated to hospitals and charitable foundations. Her beloved niece, Marion, received what was left. Everything was accounted for, down to the last cent. Except for one thing. Of the house, her life's work, the project that had consumed 38 years and $5.5 million, there was not a single word in the will. To her, it had only been a tool, a means, not an end, a process, not a result. With her death, it had lost all meaning. The heirs, following the legend, opened one of her safes, hoping to find gold or jewels. But inside, there was nothing of market value, only 2 tiny lockets. In one, a lock of fair baby hair, her daughter Annie, who had died in infancy. In the other, a lock of her husband William's hair, and nothing more. All the pain, all the grief, all the obsession that had spawned 160 rooms, 10,000 windows, and 2,000 doors. It all began here, with these 2 locks of hair. This was the root of the entire story. Not the curse of a rifle, not the verdict of a medium, but the unbearable weight of loss which one woman had tried to build over, to drown out, to outsmart. And now that she was gone, only the house remained. A vast, empty, meaningless shell. A monument to love that had turned into fear. When the hammers fell silent and the dust settled, the world, for the first time, could see Sarah Winchester's creation without the distorting noise of construction. And the verdict was nearly unanimous. Architecturally useless. Experts and appraisers called it a labyrinth of absurdity, an engineer's nightmare, a pile of expensive materials wasted. The house that had been the meaning of its owner's life was wanted by no one. It was put up for auction and sold for a pittance, just $135,000 for an estate into which over $5 million had been invested. It seemed the story of the ghost house would end ingloriously. It would be dismantled for building materials, and another apricot orchard would be planted in its place. But then, new owners entered the picture. A family named Brown. They were not architects or historians. They were a different kind of visionary. They were showmen. They understood one simple thing. You don't sell the house. You sell the story. They were the first to open the doors of the labyrinth to the public just 5 months after Sarah's death. And they gave it a new name. A name that would go down in history. Not La Nada Villa, as its owner had called it, but the catchy, intriguing, commercially flawless Winchester Mystery House. It was a stroke of marketing genius. One woman's tragedy began to be transformed into a commodity. Her curse became a brand. The Brown family and subsequent owners didn't just preserve the legends. They embellished them, polished them, added new, even spookier details. The myth that builders had died in the house. The story of President Theodore Roosevelt's visit, where he was allegedly turned away at the door. Every fabrication added value to the house. The spiritualist seance, which for Sarah had been a desperate attempt at survival, became the main event of an entertainment program. Her grief became an attraction, her fear a source of cheap thrills for tourists. And it worked. The house survived. It survived not because of its architecture, but because we, the public, fell in love with its myth. We gladly pay money to wander through someone else's madness, to laugh at a staircase to the ceiling, to feel smarter and more normal against the backdrop of this great oddity. The house ceased to be a monument to one woman's grief. It became a mirror of our endless fascination with other people's tragedies, other people's secrets, other people's loneliness. We return here again and again. We walk these same corridors, and as long as we are here, the sound of hammers, however imaginary, does not fall silent. And the ultimate question remains open. Who are the real ghosts here? The legion of souls killed by the Winchester rifle? Or Sarah herself, whose deepest personal tragedy has become our eternal entertainment? Whose attempt to atone for the guilt of the gun that won the West has been turned into a souvenir you can buy at the exit? And so, the story of one of America's deadliest fortunes was transformed into architecture. Money born from violence was channeled into an endless ritual of construction, a desperate attempt to build over the emptiness left by grief and to drown out the echo of gunshots with the sound of a hammer. But what did she ultimately build? A prison for ghosts or a sanctuary for her own soul? And which is more terrifying, the labyrinth created from fear, or the fact that, a century later, we have turned this monument to the greatest of human pains into an amusement park ride?
I can't believe this is real.
This story has no simple answer, and we invite you to join the dialogue.
Let's get a picture.
Share your thoughts in the comments. What is this house to you? Your support through a subscription and a like allows us to continue exploring such complex and multi-layered lives.